experiments. Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. A Father's World Shatters. Frank Draper drummed his fingers against the sleek kitchen island, his other hand wrapped around a steaming cup of black coffee. The aroma of freshly baked cookies filled the air, Amy's latest culinary experiment. His daughter's homework lay before him, the cursive handwriting flowing across the page with careful precision that made him smile. These evening homework sessions had become their ritual, a sacred time he carved out despite the crushing demands of running his tech startup. "Dad, can you check if I got all the dates right?" Amy called from the living room, where she was helping her twin sister Anna with a science project. "It's for the family timeline part." "On it, sweetheart." Frank took another sip of coffee, his eyes scanning the essay titled Our Family Story. The first few paragraphs were standard fare: birthdays, anniversaries, family vacations. His chest swelled with pride at Amy's detailed recollection of their trip to Disney World last summer. Then he reached the middle section. The coffee cup stopped halfway to his mouth. He read the passage again, certain he'd misunderstood. "Mom says Dad isn't our real father. She told me and Anna that he was paid to marry her and raise us. There was a deal with $1 million. That's why we visit Uncle Warren every month. He has our eyes. Mom says we can't tell Dad because it would hurt him, but I don't understand why we have to keep lying." Frank's grip tightened on the paper, creating small creases along the edges. The words seemed to pulse on the page, each one a dagger to his chest. His mind raced through 1,000 moments: Victoria's insistence on handling all medical records, the mysterious monthly visits to Uncle Warren, the sudden windfall 13 years ago that she'd attributed to her grandmother's inheritance. "Dad, is everything okay?" Amy's voice pulled him back to reality. She stood in the doorway, concern etched on her face, a face he now studied with painful intensity, searching for traces of Warren McElroy. Frank forced his features into neutrality, years of corporate negotiations serving him well. "Everything's fine, sweetheart. Just caught up in some work thoughts. Why don't you and Anna wrap up for tonight? It's getting late. But you haven't finished checking my essay. I'll look at it tomorrow morning, promise. Go on, get ready for bed." The girls retreated upstairs, their footsteps echoing through the house. Frank waited until he heard their bedroom door close before pulling out his phone. His thumb hovered over Victoria's number, but another name caught his eye: Jeffrey Vogel, their family lawyer. As if on cue, the phone buzzed in his hand. Jeffrey's name flashed across the screen. "Frank," Jeffrey's voice was tight with urgency. "We need to talk immediately. It's about Victoria and Warren McElroy. Funny you should mention them." Frank's voice was deadly calm. "I was just about to call you. This isn't something we should discuss over the phone. Can you meet me at my office? Now?" Frank glanced at his watch. 8:45 p.m. Victoria wouldn't be back from her support group meeting for another hour. "I'll be there in 20 minutes. He called their regular babysitter, Jessica, who lived next door. Once she arrived, Frank grabbed his coat and car keys. At the front door, he paused. "Girls," he called up the stairs. "Jessica's here to watch you until Mom gets home. I have an emergency meeting." "Okay, Dad," they called back in unison. "Love you both." "Love you too." Frank's hands clenched around the steering wheel as he drove through the quiet suburban streets. The same streets where he taught the twins to ride their bikes, where they'd gone trick-or-treating every Halloween, where he'd built a life on what now seemed to be foundations of sand. Jeffrey's office was in a converted Victorian mansion on the outskirts of downtown Boston. The lawyer was waiting at the entrance, his usual polished appearance showing signs of strain. "Inside," Jeffrey said, ushering Frank through the ornate doors. "My private office." They settled into leather chairs, a heavy mahogany desk between them. Jeffrey pulled out a thick file. "How much do you know?" the lawyer asked. "I know I've been living a lie." Frank's voice was ice. "I know Victoria and McElroy have been running some kind of scheme. What I don't know is why my own lawyer, who's handled every contract and legal document for my family for the past 15 years, is only telling me about it now." Jeffrey had the grace to look ashamed. "I only confirmed the full scope of it today. I've had suspicions for years, but Victoria was careful, very careful, until now. Tell me everything. First, I need you to understand something. What I'm about to share isn't just about your family. It's about a conspiracy that could destroy dozens of lives and one of the largest biotech companies in the world. I don't care about other lives or biotech companies. Frank's words cut like steel. I care about my daughters. Jeffrey nodded and opened the file. It started 13 years ago. Warren McElroy was running secret experiments at Genesis Futures, illegal human fertility trials. He was using his own genetic material without consent, creating children through various surrogates and donors. But that wasn't enough for him. He wanted his offspring raised in specific environments, by specific types of people. And Victoria? She was his head of psychological screening. Her job was to find suitable candidates, successful men who could provide stable homes for McElroy's biological children, men who were vulnerable enough to be manipulated, but strong enough to be good fathers. Frank's jaw tightened. The $1 million. Payment for services rendered. Jeffrey's voice was bitter. You weren't the only one, Frank. There are others. Other families. Other fathers who don't know they're raising McElroy's children. How many? I've identified 5 so far. All following the same pattern. Successful professionals who faced financial difficulties around the time of their marriages. Each received exactly $1 million through various concealed channels. Each family has children who regularly visit Uncle Warren for supposed mentorship programs. Frank stood abruptly, pacing the office. You said Victoria was careful until now. What changed? Jeffrey pulled out another document. This is a draft of a new will McElroy is preparing. He's planning to announce his legacy program, reveal all his biological children, and create some sort of genetic dynasty. Victoria's been helping him prepare the families for the revelation. Preparing them? Or manipulating them? Both. She's been running psychological evaluations, documenting potential reactions, identifying which fathers might cause problems. Jeffrey hesitated. Frank, there's more. The monthly visits aren't just social calls. They're conducting ongoing genetic studies on the children, testing their development, their capabilities. McElroy isn't just trying to create children. He's trying to create some kind of superior bloodline. Frank stopped pacing. His face was a mask of controlled fury. Does Victoria love them at all? The girls? Or are they just lab rats in McElroy's experiment? I don't know. Jeffrey spread his hands. But I do know this. She's not just a participant in this scheme. She's one of its architects. The psychological manipulation, the careful selection of fathers, the ongoing monitoring of the families, that's all Victoria's design. Frank returned to his chair, his movements deliberate. Tell me about the other families. Frank, tell me. Jeffrey pulled out more files. The Hendersons in Cambridge. James is a software engineer. The Patels in Worcester. Raj is a neurosurgeon. The Blocks in Providence. Michael is a federal judge. The Fosters in Hartford. David is a venture capitalist. And the Reeves in Portsmouth. Thomas is a chemical engineer. All with children the same age as the twins. All born within 18 months of each other. All through supposedly routine IVF procedures at different clinics. All clinics secretly owned by shell companies connected to Genesis Futures. Frank absorbed this information, his mind already formulating plans. What tipped you off? Why come forward now? Jeffrey's face darkened. 2 weeks ago, I was approached by a former Genesis employee. She had evidence of what happened to people who threatened to expose the program. 3 former employees who discovered the truth. All dead in apparent accidents or suicides. And you think Victoria was involved? I think Victoria knows everything that happens in this program. Whether she's directly involved in the deaths, I don't know. But she's certainly aware of them. Frank stood again, this time moving to the window. The city lights twinkled below, oblivious to the darkness he'd discovered in his own home. I want document you have. Piece of evidence. Connection you've uncovered. Frank, be careful. These people invaded my life. Frank's voice was quiet, but vibrating with rage. They manipulated me, used me, lied to my face for 13 years. They treated my love for my daughters like a commodity to be bought and sold. And now they're planning to rip apart our family for some twisted genetic experiment. He turned from the window, his eyes hard. I'm not going to be careful, Jeffrey. I'm going to be thorough. I'm going to take everything they've built and tear it down brick by brick. And I'm going to make damn sure they never get near my daughters again. What are you going to do? First, I'm going to go home and act like nothing's wrong. I'm going to kiss my daughters goodnight and tell my wife I love her. Then I'm going to start gathering evidence. I want to know every detail of McElroy's operation, employee, shell company, secret bank account. I want to know who else is involved, who knows what, and who can be turned against them. That kind of investigation will take time and resources. I know. That's why I'm going to need your help. Frank's smile was devoid of warmth. You've kept their secrets long enough, Jeffrey. Time to pick a side. The lawyer nodded slowly. I'll get you everything I have. But Frank, what about the girls? What are you going to tell them? For now, nothing. They've been lied to enough. When this is over, when I've dealt with Victoria and McElroy, then I'll tell them the truth. All of it. They deserve that much. Frank gathered the files Jeffrey had shown him. I'll need a private investigator. Someone discreet, with experience in corporate espionage. I know someone. Former military intelligence. Name's Derek Mayer. Set up a meeting. Tomorrow. As Frank turned to leave, Jeffrey called after him. What about Victoria's support group meeting tonight? Frank paused at the door. Oh, I think it's time I found out what kind of support my wife's really getting. Send me Meyer's number. I'll have a job for him right away. The drive home was a blur of strategy and calculation. Frank's tech background had taught him the value of data, of finding patterns in chaos. Now those skills would serve a different purpose. Victoria was already home when he arrived, sitting at the kitchen island where he'd read Amy's essay just hours before. Emergency meeting, she asked, her tone concerned. Everything okay at the company? Frank hung up his coat, remembering moments she'd played the caring wife. Lies she'd told with that same concerned expression. Just a potential security issue. He kissed her cheek, noting how she subtly tensed at the word security. Nothing we can't handle. The girl said you didn't finish checking Amy's homework. Got distracted by some emails. I'll look at it in the morning. He stretched, feigning tiredness. Think I'll turn in early. Big day tomorrow. Of course, dear. Victoria smiled, the same smile she'd given him for 13 years. I'll be up soon. Frank climbed the stairs, stopping to look in on the twins. They were asleep, Amy's homework notebook still open on her desk. In the dim light from the hallway, he studied their faces, faces he'd loved since the moment he first held them, regardless of whose genes they carried. In their room, he lay awake, listening to Victoria's movements downstairs. His mind was already mapping out the investigation to come. He would need to be careful, patient, thorough. Victoria and McElroy had spent years building their house of lies. He would spend however long it took to destroy it. But first, he would learn everything. Secret, manipulation, betrayal. And then, when the time was right, he would make them pay. Not just for lying to him, but for treating his love for his daughters like a transaction, for turning his family into a science experiment. The price of their secrets would be everything they had built. And Frank Draper would be the one to collect. Chapter 2. The Web of Lies. The morning after Frank's meeting with Jeffrey, he sat in a different office, studying the man across from him. Derek Mayer had the kind of face that disappeared in a crowd. Medium height, medium build, unremarkable features. Perfect for surveillance work. Mr. Vogel briefed me on the basics, Mayer said, his voice carrying a slight Midwestern twinge. But I'd like to hear it from you. What exactly are we looking for? Frank placed a manila envelope on the desk between them. My wife attends what she calls a support group every Wednesday night. I need to know everything about these meetings, who attends, what they discuss, where they go afterward. I need photographs, recordings if possible, and detailed backgrounds on every participant. And the budget for this operation? Whatever it takes. Frank's expression was granite. Money isn't an issue. Mayer nodded, making notes in a small leather-bound notebook. Any particular areas of interest? Look for connections to Warren McElroy and Genesis Futures. Pay special attention to any discussions about children, especially those around 12 or 13 years old. And I want to know every time my wife makes contact with any of the other participants outside these meetings. Surveillance of this scale will require a team. How many people? 3, minimum. 1 for video documentation, 1 for audio surveillance, 1 for mobile tracking. Do it. But I want to approve every team member personally. Frank leaned forward. These people we're watching, they're careful, professional. They've kept this secret for over a decade. Meyer's eyes sharpened with interest. Military background? Unknown. But they've eliminated threats before. 3 suspicious deaths among former employees who knew too much. Understood. Meyer's notebook disappeared into his jacket. When do we start? Tonight. Victoria has a dinner meeting with what she claims is a patient's family. I want to know who she's really meeting. I'll have a team in place within 4 hours. Frank stood, extending his hand. One more thing, Mr. Mayor. This operation requires absolute discretion. If my wife or her associates discover they're being watched. Mr. Draper, Meyer's grip was firm. In 15 years of private investigation, I've never blown a surveillance operation. Your wife won't know we exist until you want her to. After Mayer left, Frank spent an hour on his laptop, his fingers flying over the keyboard as he created a secure digital infrastructure for the investigation. Encrypted email accounts, anonymous messaging systems, secure cloud storage for the surveillance data. His tech background was becoming a weapon. His phone buzzed. A text from Victoria. Lunch today? I can meet you at your office. Frank stared at the message, remembering how many times they'd shared lunch in his office, how many times she'd listened to him talk about his company's challenges and triumphs, how many times she'd been evaluating him, reporting back to McElroy. Can't today, he typed back. Board meeting preparations. Rain check? Of course, dear. Don't work too hard. Love you. Each word felt like acid on his screen. The rest of the day passed in a blur of meetings and conference calls, Frank maintaining his normal routine while his mind worked on multiple tracks. In between discussing quarterly projections and development timelines, he was processing everything Jeffrey had told him, planning his next moves. At 3 o'clock, his secretary announced an unexpected visitor, Jeffrey Vogel. Sorry to drop in, the lawyer said once they were alone in Frank's office. But I found something you need to see. He placed a USB drive on Frank's desk. Victoria's been keeping records. Detailed ones. Not just psychological profiles of the fathers, but ongoing assessments. Things she noticed during family dinners, conversations she recorded, behavioral patterns she identified. Frank plugged the drive into his laptop, his jaw tightening as he scrolled through the files. Page after page of clinical observations about his behavior, his interactions with the twins, his emotional responses, all categorized and analyzed like he was a lab specimen. There's more, Jeffrey said quietly. She has profiles on potential replacements. Frank's head snapped up. Replacements? In case any of the current fathers become problematic. She's identified suitable candidates who could step in, take over raising the children if necessary. The implications hit Frank like a physical blow. They weren't just planning to reveal the truth. They were prepared to remove him from his daughter's lives entirely if he didn't react the way they wanted. How did you get this? Victoria asked me to review some contracts last week. These files were in the same folder. I don't think she realized they were there. Frank copied the files to his secure cloud storage, then removed the drive. I need you to do something else for me, Jeffrey. I need everything you can find on Genesis Future's financial structure. Shell companies, offshore accounts, property holdings, everything. That could take weeks. Then I suggest you start now. After Jeffrey left, Frank spent hours analyzing Victoria's files. Her clinical tone made his skin crawl. Subject shows strong paternal instincts despite lack of biological connection, and children have formed significant emotional attachment to surrogate father figure. At 6 o'clock, his phone buzzed. A message from Mayor. Target entering Bella Luna restaurant, Back Bay. Meeting with male subject, approximately 60 years old. Matches photos of Warren McElroy. Frank's fingers tightened around the phone. So much for dinner with a patient's family. Full surveillance package, he texted back. Audio if possible. Already on it. We'll have transcript within 24 hours. Frank drove home, his mind racing with plans. The twins were doing homework at the kitchen table when he arrived. "Dad." Amy jumped up to hug him. "Can you help me with my science project? It's about genetics." The irony almost made him laugh. "Sure, sweetheart. Let me change first." He helped Amy chart Punnett squares and probability ratios, explaining dominant and recessive traits while his heart ached at the deception built into every lesson. Anna joined them, fascinated by the colored diagrams they were creating. Victoria came home at 9, bringing the scent of expensive perfume and restaurant wine with her. "Productive dinner?" Frank asked casually. "Very." She kissed his cheek. "The family is struggling with their son's anxiety issues. I think we made real progress tonight." The lies fell from her lips so easily, wrapped in professional concern and practiced sincerity. Frank wondered how he'd never noticed before. Chapter 3. The First Moves. The next week established a pattern. During the day, Frank ran his company, attended meetings, and maintained his normal routine. At night, he pored over surveillance reports from Meyer's team, building a comprehensive picture of Victoria's activities. The support group was exactly what Jeffrey had suggested: regular gatherings of McElroy surrogates and their children. Meyer's team identified all 5 families from Jeffrey's list, plus 3 more that hadn't been in the lawyer's files. Frank created a secure database, mapping connections and patterns. Victoria wasn't just a participant. She was the coordinator, the one who monitored the families and reported back to McElroy. The psychological manipulation went deeper than anyone had suspected. 10 days after discovering Amy's essay, Frank sat in a secure room in Meyer's office, listening to recordings from Victoria's latest meeting with McElroy. Frank's relationship with the girls is strong. Victoria's voice came through clearly. "He'll be resistant to any changes in the custody arrangement. That won't be an issue." McElroy's voice was cultured, confident. "The legal framework is already in place. Once we reveal the program, biological parentage will take precedence. Your psychological assessments will support our position that transitioning the children to their true father's influence is in their best interest. He'll fight it. Let him try." Every judge in Massachusetts who handles family law has benefited from Genesis Future's charitable donations. The system is prepared for this, Victoria. That's why we chose these men carefully. Successful enough to provide stable homes, vulnerable enough to be controlled. Frank's hands clenched as he listened to them discuss dismantling his family like it was a business transaction. When the recording ended, he turned to Mayer. "What do we know about these charitable donations?" "Working on it. Preliminary research shows Genesis has donated over $50 million to various legal organizations and family court initiatives in the past decade. I want details on donation, judge, connection, and I want everything you can find on the 3 deaths Jeffrey mentioned." Mayer nodded. "Already investigating. The deaths were well disguised: a car accident, a suicide, a home invasion gone wrong. But there are patterns if you know where to look." "Show me." The investigator spread photographs across the table. Sarah Chun, research assistant, died in a single car crash in 2019. Brake lines were cut. James Torres, lab technician, apparent suicide in 2020. Toxicology showed unusual substances in his system. Maria Kovac, administrative assistant, killed in a supposed robbery in 2021. Nothing was taken from her home. All Genesis employees? All worked in different departments, different locations. The only connection was access to information about the fertility program. Frank studied the photos, memorizing the faces of those who died, trying to expose the truth. Any evidence linking Victoria directly? Not yet, but she was in contact with all 3 victims in the days before their deaths. Phone records show calls from unlisted numbers matching her usual patterns. Frank added the information to his growing database. Piece by piece, he was assembling a complete picture of McElroy's operation and Victoria's role in it. His phone vibrated, a text from Victoria. "Running late tonight. Don't wait up." Another meeting with McElroy, probably. Another session planning how to destroy the life he'd built. "Mr. Draper," Meyer's voice was cautious, "there's something else you should know. Your wife. She's not just reporting to McElroy. She's documenting everything, writing some kind of book or paper about the program." "Show me." Mayer pulled up files on his laptop, fragments of a manuscript Victoria was writing. The working title made Frank's blood boil: Engineering Family Dynamics, a long-term study in genetic and social integration. His family's entire life had been a research project. Moment, emotion, bond he'd formed with his daughters, all analyzed and documented for Victoria's academic ambitions. "Keep digging," Frank ordered, standing to leave. "I want everything. File, recording, piece of evidence that shows what they've done." "What's the endgame here?" Mayer asked. "What are you planning to do with all this information?" Frank paused at the door, his voice cold with determination. "They're planning to destroy my family, Mr. Mayer. I'm going to make sure that when the dust settles, they're the ones who lose everything." He drove home through the quiet streets, his mind working through strategies and contingencies. Victoria and McElroy had spent years building their web of lies. He would need to be patient, thorough, and absolutely ruthless in dismantling it. The house was dark when he arrived, except for a light in the twins' room. He found them reading in bed, a habit they'd had since learning to read. "Dad." Anna looked up from her book. "Mom said you're working really hard lately. Are you okay?" Frank sat on the edge of her bed, smiling at both his daughters. "I'm fine, sweetheart. Just some complicated projects at work. Nothing for you to worry about. Promise?" Amy asked, her expression serious. "Promise." He kissed them both good night, then added softly, "You know I love you both more than anything, right?" They nodded, smiling sleepily. "Love you too, Dad." In the hallway, Frank paused, listening to their quiet conversation about their books. Everything he was doing, piece of evidence he was gathering, plan he was making, it was all for them. To protect them from Victoria's manipulation, from McElroy's twisted ambitions, from the lies that had surrounded their entire lives. He went to his home office, logged into his secure server, and began reviewing the latest data from Meyer's surveillance. There would be time for confrontation later. For now, he would watch, learn, and prepare. Victoria and McElroy thought they held all the cards, that their years of planning made them invulnerable. They had no idea what was coming. Chapter 1. Building the Case. The soft glow of multiple monitors illuminated Frank's face as his fingers moved across the keyboard. He converted his home office into a command center, each screen displaying different pieces of the elaborate puzzle he was assembling. 3 weeks had passed since discovering Victoria's betrayal, and every moment not spent maintaining his public facade was dedicated to dismantling her carefully constructed lies. "Sir," Derek Meyer's voice came through his encrypted phone line. "We've made contact with Sandy Roberson." Frank minimized the financial records he'd been analyzing. "Tell me." "She's been investigating Genesis futures for the past 18 months. Started after a source inside the company tipped her off about irregularities in their fertility treatment programs. She's willing to meet, but she's cautious. Says she's had multiple sources disappear. Set it up. Neutral location, full security protocols. There's more," Mayer continued. "She mentioned a name you'll want to hear, Dr. Juana Butler. Former head geneticist at Genesis who went off the grid 6 months ago. Roberson thinks she knows where Butler's hiding." Frank leaned back, mind racing through possibilities. "Find out everything you can about Butler's work at Genesis. Project histories, research focuses, anything that might indicate what she discovered before disappearing. Already on it. One other thing, Victoria's planning another support group meeting for tomorrow night. Different location this time. Private room at the Morton Medical Center. A hospital? That's new." Frank pulled up the building's blueprints on one of his monitors. "Get me audio and visual coverage of that room. It'll be tricky. Hospital security. I don't care how tricky it is. I want to know exactly what they're doing with those children in a medical facility." After ending the call, Frank accessed the encrypted files he'd extracted from Victoria's laptop. Her psychological profiles of the father candidates were methodical, disturbing in their precision. Each man had been evaluated not just for stability and resources, but for specific personality traits that would make them ideal unwitting participants in McElroy's experiment. His own profile made his jaw clench. Subject displays strong protective instincts and high emotional intelligence, particularly valuable for raising female offspring. Financial vulnerability due to startup struggles creates optimal leverage point. Notable trait: tendency to channel anger into strategic action rather than immediate confrontation. Recommendation: highest priority candidate for Phase 1 implementation. A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. Dad. Frank quickly switched his monitors to display innocent work documents. Come in, Amy. His daughter entered, clutching her science textbook. Mom says you're working too hard lately. She's worried about you. Is she now? Frank kept his voice neutral, gesturing for Amy to sit. What else does Mom say about me? Amy shrugged, settling into the chair beside his desk. Just that you seem different. More distant. Are you mad at her? Frank studied his daughter's face, McElroy's eyes looking back at him with genuine concern. No, sweetheart. Just dealing with some complicated business situations. Nothing for you to worry about. Is that why you have all these new computers? Part of a new security system I'm testing for the company. The lie came easily, necessary to protect her. How about that science homework? Need help? Later that night, Frank met Sandy Roberson in an abandoned parking garage on the outskirts of Boston. The investigative journalist was younger than he'd expected, but her eyes held the sharp, haunted look of someone who'd seen too much. Mr. Draper. She emerged from the shadows, tablet in hand. I've spent 18 months trying to prove what Genesis Futures is really doing. How did you figure it out in less than a month? They made it personal. Frank's voice carried an edge that made her step back slightly. Show me what you have. Sandy pulled up documents on her tablet. Genesis Futures isn't just dabbling in fertility treatments. They're conducting massive-scale genetic engineering, creating children with carefully selected traits. McElroy's biological material is just the beginning. They're manipulating genes, trying to enhance intelligence, physical capabilities, even emotional responses. And Dr. Butler? She was their top geneticist until she discovered something that scared her enough to run. Sandy swiped through more files. I tracked her to a small town in Vermont. She's living under an assumed name, but she's willing to talk to you specifically. Said something about owing it to the children. Frank's expression hardened. What exactly was Butler's role in all this? She designed the genetic modifications, but according to my sources, she drew the line at behavioral conditioning. That's where your wife came in. Elaborate. Victoria Pitts isn't just studying these families. She's engineering their emotional dynamics, using psychological techniques to strengthen or weaken specific bonds, manipulating attachment patterns. It's all part of McElroy's larger plan, which is... Sandy's voice dropped lower. He believes he can create a superior human lineage. These children aren't just experiments. They're the first generation of what he sees as an evolutionarily advanced human subspecies. The fathers, the families, the psychological manipulation. It's all designed to provide the optimal environmental conditions for his genetic improvements to express themselves. Frank absorbed this information, each word feeding the cold rage building inside him. And the children's regular visits to McElroy? Medical tests, cognitive assessments, genetic monitoring. They're tracking how their modifications develop over time. Sandy hesitated. Mr. Draper, there's something else you should know. Victoria's role. It's bigger than just psychological manipulation. She's been documenting everything, preparing research papers about the program's success. She's as invested in this as McElroy. Where's Butler now? Small farm outside Burlington. Very isolated. She's paranoid about security, with good reason. 3 of her former colleagues died in suspicious circumstances after asking too many questions about the program. Frank stood, decision made. I need everything you have on those deaths. And set up a meeting with Butler. Tell her I'm coming with proof of what they're doing to these families. Be careful, Sandy warned. Genesis has powerful connections. And Victoria. People who've crossed her tend to have accidents. Let me worry about Victoria. Frank's smile held no warmth. Focus on building the paper trail. I want a legal experiment, manipulated family, covered up death documented and verified. What's your endgame here? Going public could traumatize those children all over again. My endgame is making sure Victoria and McElroy never get near another family. Whatever it takes. As Frank drove home, his mind processed the new information in parallel tracks, forming connections and strategies. Victoria was at another support group meeting, giving him time to work. In his home office, he created new sections in his evidence database, one for Butler's genetic research, one for Sandy's investigation notes, one for the suspicious deaths. A text from Mayer lit up his phone. Hospital meeting recording secured. You need to hear this. Frank plugged in his headphones, listening as Victoria's clinical voice filled his ears. The genetic markers are expressing exactly as predicted. Cognitive development is accelerating in all subjects. The only variable we need to control more tightly is paternal emotional influence. Some of the fathers are forming stronger bonds than anticipated. McElroy's response was contemplative. The psychological attachments were necessary for proper childhood development, but they could become problematic during the transition phase. I've prepared contingencies for that. The replacement candidates are already vetted and monitored. When the time comes, removing the current fathers from the equation will be relatively simple. Frank's hands clenched into fists as he listened to them discuss discarding him and the other fathers like obsolete equipment. But beneath his rage, his tactical mind was already analyzing weaknesses in their plans, finding pressure points he could exploit. He pulled up his secure messaging system, sending instructions to his growing network of allies. To Mayer, full surveillance on replacement candidates. I want backgrounds, vulnerabilities, anything we can use. To Sandy, need complete documentation of Genesis Future's illegal experiments. Priority on anything linking them to the suspicious deaths. To Jeffrey, set up blind trusts and offshore accounts. When this breaks, I want our assets protected. A soft knock interrupted his planning. Victoria entered without waiting for a response, her professional mask firmly in place. Working late again? She moved to massage his shoulders, a gesture that once brought comfort but now made his skin crawl. You've seemed so tense lately. Frank forced himself to lean back, playing his role, just trying to stay ahead of the competition. How was your support group? Productive. We're making real progress with several families. She kissed the top of his head. Don't stay up too late. The girls miss having you around for breakfast. After she left, Frank opened a new file in his database. In it, he began mapping out lie Victoria had told him over the past 13 years, manipulation, calculated move in her grand psychological experiment. Each entry strengthened his resolve. They thought they could simply replace him, erase him from his daughters' lives like deleting an obsolete file. They were about to learn how dangerous it was to underestimate a man with nothing left to lose and everything to protect. Chapter 2. The Confrontation. The drive to Burlington took just under 4 hours. Frank had told Victoria he was visiting potential investors, another lie in their growing collection. Dr. Juana Butler's farm sat at the end of a long dirt road, surrounded by dense woods. Security cameras tracked his approach to the main house. Inside, Butler called through an intercom. Quickly. The former geneticist was tall and angular, with sharp features and quick, nervous movements. Her living room had been converted into a research center, walls covered with genetic diagrams and statistical models. I wondered when one of the fathers would figure it out, she said, studying Frank with clinical interest. Though I didn't expect it to be you. Victoria's psychological profile suggested you'd be one of the more malleable subjects. I want to know everything, Frank replied, his voice hard. Experiment, modification, risk to my daughters. Butler gestured to the diagrams. McElroy wasn't content with normal genetic selection. He wanted to enhance specific traits, intelligence, physical capabilities, emotional regulation. I designed the modifications myself. Technically brilliant work. Her expression darkened. What I didn't know was how they planned to implement the behavioral conditioning. Victoria's contribution. She convinced McElroy that genetics alone weren't enough. The children needed specific environmental conditions, carefully controlled psychological development. Butler pulled up files on her computer. They're not just studying the children's genetic expression. They're actively manipulating their emotional and cognitive development through controlled trauma and attachment disruption. Frank's hands clenched. Explain. The plan was always to reveal the truth eventually, but in a carefully staged way. The emotional shock, the disruption of family bonds, the introduction of new authority figures, it's all designed to create specific psychological responses. Victoria's been documenting everything, preparing research papers about the successful modification of human attachment patterns, the replacement candidates, part of the next phase. Once the children's original family bonds are disrupted, they'll be gradually transitioned to new father figures, ones chosen specifically for the next stage of psychological conditioning. Butler's voice was bitter. It's elegant, in a horrifically unethical way. Victoria's using the children's genuine love for their fathers as a variable to be manipulated. How many children are in the program? 47 across the country. Your daughter's group was phase 1. The first successful implementation of both genetic modification and psychological conditioning. She pulled up more files. But there's something else you need to see. Something that made me run. The documents she showed him made his blood run cold. Pages of data about failed experiments, genetic modifications gone wrong, children who didn't survive the procedures. All carefully hidden, the failures buried under layers of corporate documentation. How many died? 17 in the early stages. Before they perfected the techniques. Butler's hands shook slightly. When I discovered the truth, I confronted McElroy. He said it was an acceptable loss ratio for advancing human evolution. That's when I knew I had to get out. And the others who discovered the truth? Sarah Chun found the files about the failed experiments. James Torres discovered they were still running unauthorized genetic trials. Maria Kovac overheard Victoria discussing the psychological conditioning program. Butler's voice dropped. All dead within weeks of raising concerns. Frank absorbed this information, his tactical mind already formulating plans. I need copies of everything. Document, piece of data that proves what they've done. They'll kill you if they find out you know. No, Frank's voice was ice. They'll try. The confrontation began subtly. Frank started asking innocent questions about the girl's medical history during dinner, watching Victoria's micro-expressions. She was good. Nearly 2 decades of psychological training had made her an excellent liar. But he was better. The girls mentioned their last checkup with Uncle Warren, he said casually, noting how her fork paused halfway to her mouth. Funny, I don't remember signing any medical authorization forms. It was just a routine visit, Victoria replied smoothly. Nothing to worry about, like the genetic screening tests or the cognitive assessments. Her eyes snapped to his face, professional mask slipping for just a moment. What are you talking about? Frank took a sip of wine, every movement calculated. Genesis Future's latest patent filing is fascinating reading, especially the sections about genetic enhancement and behavioral conditioning. You must be very proud of your contribution to the research, Victoria. The color drained from her face as he laid out everything he knew. The illegal experiments, the murdered whistleblowers, the psychological manipulation of countless families. When he finished, the silence stretched between them like a chasm. Did you ever love any of us? He asked quietly, hearing the twins playing upstairs. Or were we all just subjects in McElroy's grand experiment? Victoria's response was cold and calculating, exactly as he'd expected. Love is irrelevant. We're part of something greater than conventional family structures. Warren is creating the future. By killing children in failed experiments? By manipulating families for your research? Progress requires sacrifice. The genetic advancements we've achieved. Save your justifications, Frank cut her off. I've seen Butler's files. I know about the 17 children who died. About your plans to replace the fathers once you've finished documenting our psychological responses. Victoria's expression hardened. You've been busy. Does it bother you, knowing you were selected specifically for your manipulability? That every aspect of your relationship with the girls has been carefully engineered? Does it bother you that you're going to lose everything? Careful, Frank. Her smile was razor-sharp. People who threaten the program tend to have unfortunate accidents. Just ask Sarah Chin's family. Or what's left of them. Is that a threat? A reminder. You're not the first person to discover the truth. You won't be the first one we've dealt with. She stood gracefully. I truly hoped you'd be one of the success stories. Your bond with the girls was developing exactly as predicted. Frank watched her head upstairs to say goodnight to the twins, his rage contained behind a wall of tactical calculation. The confrontation had confirmed everything he'd suspected. Victoria wasn't just complicit in McElroy's schemes. She was a true believer, committed to their twisted vision of human advancement. Later that night, he sent encrypted messages to his allies. To Butler, confrontation complete. Implement security protocols. To Sandy, green light on evidence compilation. Focus on the 17 deaths. To Mayer, full surveillance activated. Watch for counter moves. To Jeffrey, prepare legal contingencies. They'll move soon. Victoria was already in bed when he entered their bedroom, her face illuminated by her laptop screen. He knew she was warning McElroy, setting their countermeasures in motion. Let them try. He'd spent weeks preparing for this moment, anticipating every possible response. The next few days would determine everything. Victoria and McElroy would move against him, trying to discredit him before he could expose their operation. They thought their power and connections made them invulnerable. They were about to learn otherwise. Chapter 3. The Counterattack. The first strike came at 9:15 a.m. Frank was in a board meeting when his secretary interrupted with an urgent message. Child Protective Services was at his house, responding to anonymous allegations of abuse. The girls are at school, Mayer reported through his earpiece. Victoria's playing concerned mother perfectly. Already suggested you've been acting erratically. Frank excused himself from the meeting, his voice steady as he called Jeffrey. Implement Protocol 1. Within 30 minutes, Jeffrey arrived at Frank's house with a team of independent child psychologists and documentation of every interaction Frank had had with his daughters over the past 6 months. Videos, school records, medical examinations, all proving his exemplary parenting. Mrs. Draper, the lead CPS investigator, said, reviewing the evidence, these allegations seem questionable given such thorough documentation of Mr. Draper's parenting. Victoria's professional mask slipped for just a moment. I'm just concerned about recent changes in his behavior. He's been making wild accusations, spending hours locked in his office. Documenting your crimes? Frank entered the room, tablet in hand. Should we discuss the real reason for these allegations? The CPS team left 2 hours later, their report noting the allegations appear to be unfounded and possibly malicious. Round 1 of Frank. The second attack targeted his company. Anonymous tips to investors suggested financial irregularities, hinting at embezzlement and fraud. But Frank had anticipated this too. Release the audit reports, he instructed his CFO. All of them. 3 independent accounting firms had spent the past 2 weeks going through transaction, contract, every financial decision. The results painted a picture of impeccable corporate governance. Your wife's friends are getting desperate, Mayer observed, playing surveillance footage of Victoria meeting McElroy in a private hospital wing. They're discussing something called Protocol Sigma. Frank's eyes narrowed. Get me everything on that protocol. And increase security on Butler's location. The next morning, Frank's major investors received detailed portfolios, proving his company's financial stability. Several noted similar allegations had been made against other tech firms connected to Genesis Futures. Round 2 to Frank. Victoria's final move was both predictable and almost effective. She filed for emergency custody, claiming Frank's conspiracy theories about genetic experiments were signs of mental breakdown. Your husband has become delusional, Victoria told the emergency court hearing, her voice trembling with practiced concern. He's making wild accusations about medical experiments and murdered scientists. I fear for our daughter's safety. Frank sat calmly as she testified, watching the judge's reactions. When his turn came, he spoke quietly but firmly. Your Honor, I've prepared evidence proving every allegation I've made. But first, I'd like to call a witness. He nodded to Jeffrey, who opened the courtroom door. Dr. Juana Butler entered, her presence causing Victoria to physically recoil. Hello, Victoria. It's been a while. For the next hour, Butler laid out the truth about Genesis Futures, the illegal experiments, the genetic modifications, the psychological manipulation of families. She provided documentation of Victoria's role, including recordings of her discussing Protocol Sigma, the systematic replacement of uncooperative fathers. We have evidence linking Ms. Pitts to 3 deaths, Jeffrey added, presenting files to the judge. Former Genesis employees who discovered aspects of this program. Victoria's emergency custody petition was denied. The judge, looking disturbed by the evidence presented, ordered a full investigation into Genesis Futures and granted Frank temporary sole custody pending criminal investigations. This isn't over, Victoria hissed as they left the courthouse. You have no idea what you're dealing with. Actually, Frank replied calmly, I know exactly what I'm dealing with. A woman so obsessed with studying human attachment that she forgot how to feel it herself. Tell McElroy his genetic dynasty is about to collapse. That night, Frank sat in his home office, monitoring the fallout. Victoria had moved to a hotel, ordered to maintain distance from the girls until the investigation was complete. Meyer's team reported she'd spent 3 hours in McElroy's private office at Genesis Futures. They're destroying documents, Mayer reported. Lots of them. Let them try. Frank smiled coldly. Butler and I copied everything weeks ago. Sandy's team is already preparing the expose. His phone buzzed. A message from Jeffrey. FBI wants to meet. They're particularly interested in the deaths of Chun, Torres, and Kovac. Frank leaned back, considering the next moves in this chess game. Victoria and McElroy would be desperate now, their carefully constructed world crumbling around them. They try something dramatic, probably illegal. Let them. Every action they took would only add evidence to the case being built against them. A soft knock at his office door pulled him from his thoughts. Amy and Anna stood there, looking uncertain. Dad. Amy's voice was small. Is Mom really never coming back? Frank got up and hugged them both. Your mom needs help, sweethearts. She's made some bad choices that hurt a lot of people. Right now, the most important thing is keeping you both safe. Safe from what? Anna asked. From people who forget that love and family are more important than their ambitions. He held them tighter, these precious girls who'd been part of an experiment but had become his whole world. I promise you both. Everything I'm doing is to protect you. Later, after the girls were asleep, Frank reviewed the security footage from Genesis Futures. Victoria and McElroy were in full panic mode, realizing their schemes were exposed. But they still had one card left to play, the legal system they'd spent years corrupting. Sir, Meyer's voice came through his secure line. We've intercepted communications about an emergency board meeting at Genesis. Tomorrow morning. Record everything, Frank ordered. And get Sandy ready. The moment they make their move, we release everything. The experiments, the murders, the psychological manipulation, all of it. He opened his evidence database, reviewing the ammunition he'd gathered. Victoria had thought him predictable, manipulatable. Instead, he'd used everything she'd documented about his personality against her. While she watched for emotional outbursts, he'd gathered evidence. While she expected confrontation, he'd built alliances. Tomorrow would bring new attacks, new attempts to discredit him or seize control of the girls. Let them come. Frank Draper had spent weeks preparing for this battle, and he intended to win it completely. Victoria and McElroy had tried to play God with people's lives, treating families like laboratory specimens. Now they would learn the price of their ambitions. The storm was gathering strength, but Frank was ready for whatever lightning might strike. Chapter 1. The Reckoning. FBI agent Nathaniel Tanner stood before the wall of evidence in the Boston field office's secure conference room. Surveillance photos, financial records, and medical documents covered every surface. At the center was a diagram showing the connections between Warren McElroy, Genesis Futures, and 8 carefully selected families. Walk me through it again, Tanner said, turning to Frank Draper. Frank pointed to the central node of the diagram. McElroy used his position at Genesis to conduct illegal genetic experiments, creating children using his own DNA without consent. Victoria selected the fathers based on psychological profiles, choosing men who could provide stable homes while remaining manipulatable. And the murders? 3 whistleblowers who discovered different aspects of the program. Sarah Chin found evidence of the genetic manipulation. James Torres uncovered ongoing unauthorized trials. Maria Kovac learned about the psychological conditioning program. Frank pulled up files on his tablet. Victoria arranged their deaths to look like accidents. Tanner studied the evidence. In 20 years with the Bureau, he'd never seen a case this meticulously documented. You've given us enough for search warrants. When we move, it'll have to be simultaneous raids. Genesis headquarters, research facilities, McElroy's private offices. I want to be there. Absolutely not. You're a witness, not an agent. I've spent months building this case. I know where they hide their records, how they encrypt their files, what to look for. Frank's voice carried an edge that made even the veteran agent take notice. You need me on site. Before Tanner could respond, his phone buzzed. They're moving research materials out of the main facility. Tonight. Frank was already heading for the door. Now or never, Agent Tanner. The raid began at midnight. FBI teams hit 12 locations simultaneously across 3 states. Frank rode with Tanner to Genesis Futures headquarters, his laptop ready to decrypt any files they found. Remember, Tanner briefed his team. Primary targets are medical records, research data, and anything related to genetic testing. Watch for attempts to destroy evidence. They breached the building's security with access codes provided by Dr. Butler. In the main research wing, they found staff frantically shredding documents and wiping hard drives. Stop the deletions, Frank ordered, moving to the central computer station. His fingers flew across the keyboard, bypassing security protocols he'd spent weeks studying. Initiating system-wide lockdown. Throughout the building, computers froze, printers stopped, and network access terminated. Frank had designed the kill switch himself, ensuring no digital evidence could be destroyed. Main database secured, he reported. But McElroy's private files will be in his office. Sub-level 3. Tanner led a team down to the executive level. They found McElroy's office empty, but Frank went straight to a painting on the wall. Behind it was a biometric safe. Stand back. Frank connected his tablet to the safe's control panel, running a bypass program he developed. The door clicked open, revealing stacks of hard drives and paper files. My God, Tanner breathed, examining the contents. Human trial records going back 15 years. Lists of genetic donors who never consented. Financial records showing payments to judges and officials. Sir, an agent burst in. You need to see this. Sub-level 5. They found a fully equipped medical facility hidden in the building's lowest level. Examination rooms, genetic testing equipment, and walls of patient files, all documenting McElroy's experiments on unwitting families. Those bastards, Tanner muttered, looking through the records. They were still running trials, planning to expand the program. Frank's phone vibrated. A text from Mayor. Victoria in custody at secondary location. McElroy cornered at his estate. Within hours, news of the raids dominated every network. Reporters gathered outside Genesis Futures as FBI agents carried out box after box of evidence. Sandy Roberson's expose hit the morning papers, revealing the full scope of McElroy's genetic manipulation program. Other fathers began coming forward, their stories matching the pattern Frank had uncovered. Men who'd been carefully selected, manipulated, and paid to raise McElroy's secret biological children. Each one had received exactly $1 million. Each family had been monitored and studied like lab specimens. The hardest part came that morning, when Frank had to explain everything to the twins. He sat them down in their living room, Dr. Josie more present to help them process the revelations. You know how we've talked about different kinds of families, he began gently. How love is more important than biology. Amy nodded. Because you're our real dad, even if we're not related by blood. That's right. But there's more you need to know about why things happened the way they did. Frank took a deep breath. Your mother and Warren McElroy were part of something very wrong. They hurt a lot of people, including other families like ours. Is that why Mom left? Anna asked quietly. Your mom made choices that were very harmful. She helped Mr. McElroy do things that weren't just wrong, but illegal. That's why the police had to get involved. Dr. Moore leaned forward. It's okay to feel confused or angry about this. Everything you're feeling is valid. Did Mom ever really love us? Amy's voice trembled. Frank pulled both girls close. Your mom lost sight of what really matters. She got so focused on her research, on being part of something she thought was important, that she forgot about love and family. But that's her failure, not yours. Nothing about this changes who you are or how much I love you. As the girls hugged him tighter, Frank met Dr. Moore's approving gaze. They discussed how to handle this moment, how to help the twins understand without traumatizing them further. What happens now? Anna asked. Now we stick together and support each other. We'll keep seeing Dr. Moore, keep talking about everything. And I promise you both, I'm not going anywhere. Later that night, after the girls were asleep, Frank reviewed footage from Victoria's arrest. His wife, soon-to-be ex-wife, had maintained her professional composure even as FBI agents led her away in handcuffs. Her only comment to reporters, "History will vindicate our work." Meyer's final surveillance report landed in his encrypted inbox. McElroy in federal custody. All research facilities secured. Butler's testimony corroborated by seized evidence. They're finished. Frank closed his laptop, allowing himself a moment to absorb the victory. Phase 1 of his revenge was complete, exposing their crimes, destroying their empire, ensuring they'd face justice for family they'd manipulated. But the real work was just beginning. The twins would need time and support to process everything. Other families would need help dealing with their own revelations. And the legal system would need to be purged of McElroy's influence to ensure justice was served. Looking at a photo of the twins on his desk, Frank renewed his silent promise. He would see this through to the end, not just for his daughters, but for child and father caught in McElroy's twisted experiment. The price of their secrets would be everything they'd built, everything they'd hoped to achieve. And Frank Draper would make sure they paid in full. Chapter 2. The Price of Truth. The federal courthouse in Boston became ground zero for the most controversial medical ethics trial in decades. Television crews camped outside as a parade of witnesses exposed Genesis Future's illegal activities. Frank sat in the front row, watching McElroy's legal team attempt to spin their defense. The biotech mogul sat at the defense table in an expensive suit, still projecting authority despite his circumstances. My client's work represents the cutting edge of genetic research, McElroy's lawyer argued. Yes, some of his methods were unorthodox, but his goals were purely scientific, advancing human genetics for the benefit of all mankind. Sandy Roberson, testifying about her investigation, demolished that narrative. This wasn't about scientific advancement. It was about one man's megalomaniacal attempt to create a genetic dynasty. The psychological manipulation of families wasn't science. It was cruel experimentation on unwitting human subjects. Dr. Butler's testimony proved even more damaging. She detailed the program's evolution, from initial genetic trials to the systematic selection and manipulation of father candidates. Warren McElroy wasn't content with normal genetic selection, she explained to the riveted courtroom. He wanted to enhance specific traits, intelligence, physical capabilities, emotional regulation. When early attempts failed, resulting in 17 deaths, he simply buried the evidence and continued experimenting. Victoria's trial ran concurrently in an adjacent courtroom. Her defense strategy crumbled when prosecutors presented her own meticulous records, psychological profiles, manipulation strategies, detailed notes on how to exploit each father's vulnerabilities. The defendant wasn't coerced, the prosecutor argued. She was an enthusiastic architect of this scheme, using her psychological expertise to help identify suitable fathers, then systematically manipulating those same men for years. She documented everything, planning to publish her research once the program was revealed. Frank's testimony came last. He took the stand in both trials, his voice steady as he described discovering the truth about his family. In McElroy's trial, he laid out the financial evidence, the pattern of million-dollar payments, the bribes to officials, the money trails leading from whistleblowers' deaths. This wasn't just fraud, he told the jury. This was a systematic attempt to create and control human beings. McElroy didn't just want children. He wanted to build a carefully engineered population he could shape and monitor. The fathers weren't chosen for their parenting abilities, but for their manipulability. In Victoria's trial, his testimony was more personal but no less devastating. She didn't just lie to me, he stated. She studied me, profiled me, selected me specifically because she believed I could be controlled. Every moment of our family life was documented and analyzed. Our daughter's emotional development was treated like a laboratory experiment. Victoria's mask finally cracked when Frank described finding Amy's essay. Did it bother you? He asked, looking directly at his wife. Writing in your research notes that the subject shows strong paternal bonding despite lack of biological connection? Was it just another data point when the girls said they loved me? The jury took less than 6 hours to reach their verdicts. McElroy was found guilty on multiple counts of murder, fraud, and illegal human experimentation. The judge's sentence was unequivocal, 6 consecutive life terms. Mr. McElroy, the judge declared, you have perverted the cause of science to serve your own megalomaniacal ambitions. You treated human beings like laboratory specimens, destroyed families for data points, and killed anyone who threatened to expose your crimes. You will spend the remainder of your life in federal prison, contemplating the cost of your ambitions. Victoria's sentencing came the following day, 20 years for her role in the scheme, with the judge noting her particular betrayal of professional ethics. As a psychologist, you took an oath to do no harm, the judge stated. Instead, you used your expertise to manipulate and destroy families. You treated your own children as test subjects in a psychological experiment. Your actions represent the gravest possible abuse of your professional knowledge and maternal responsibilities. Frank watched his wife led away in handcuffs, her professional mask finally shattered. She turned at the door, meeting his gaze one last time. I regret nothing, she said quietly. We were creating something extraordinary. No, Frank replied. You were destroying something precious, trust, love, family. And now you'll pay the price for every life you ruined. Outside the courthouse, reporters clamored for statements. Frank stood with his legal team, his voice firm as he addressed the cameras. Today, justice was served not just for my family, but for every family manipulated by Genesis Futures. Warren McElroy and Victoria Pitts treated human beings like laboratory specimens, children like genetic experiments, and parental love like a variable to be controlled. Their convictions send a clear message. No scientific ambition justifies the destruction of families. That evening, Frank sat with the twins in their living room, watching the news coverage together. They'd insisted on following the trials, supported by regular sessions with Dr. Moore. Is it really over? Amy asked. Frank hugged both his daughters close. The trials are over, but we still have work to do, helping other families, making sure nothing like this happens again. Most importantly, we have each other. Chapter 3. Rebuilding. 2 years after the trials, Frank sat in the auditorium of Lincoln Middle School, watching final rehearsals for the spring play. Amy and Anna had leading roles, Amy as Dorothy in The Wizard of Oz and Anna as the stage manager. Their talent and confidence made his chest swell with pride. Your daughters are remarkable, James Henderson said, taking the seat beside Frank. Like the other fathers from McElroy's program, Henderson had become part of their extended support network. Hard to believe how far we've all come. Frank nodded, remembering the first support group meeting he'd organized after the trials. 15 families, all grappling with the same betrayal, the same questions about identity and belonging. Now they met monthly, helping each other navigate the challenges of raising teenagers who carried the weight of McElroy's twisted legacy. Did you see the latest report from the foundation? Henderson asked. The Medical Ethics Oversight Foundation had been Frank's first project after the trials. Using his tech industry connections and a significant portion of his company's resources, he'd established an organization dedicated to preventing similar abuses in genetic research. Dr. Butler's team is making progress, Frank replied. 3 more cases of unauthorized genetic testing exposed last month. But more importantly, they're helping establish new protocols for ethical research oversight. The foundation had hired Juana Butler as their chief scientific advisor. Her expertise, combined with her first-hand knowledge of how research could be corrupted, made her invaluable in identifying potential abuses. Dad, Amy called from the stage. What did you think of the new ending? Perfect, sweetheart. Both of you were amazing. After rehearsal, they drove home, the twins chattering about costume designs and lighting cues. Frank listened, marveling at their resilience. The past 2 years hadn't been easy. Therapy sessions, difficult questions about identity, dealing with publicity from the trials. But they'd faced everything together, their bond growing stronger through each challenge. At home, Amy went to finish homework while Anna helped Frank prepare dinner. These ordinary moments had become precious, reminders of what really mattered. "Dad," Anna said, carefully chopping vegetables, "Lisa Henderson asked me about Mom today. About whether we ever visit her." Frank set down his knife, giving his daughter his full attention. "What did you tell her?" "That we don't. That some choices can't be undone." She paused. "Is that okay?" "That's perfectly okay. You and Amy get to decide how you feel about your mother. No one else." Victoria remained in federal prison, her appeals denied. She tried sending letters several times, but Frank had given the twins the choice about reading them. They decided not to, at least for now. Dr. Moore had supported their decision, emphasizing the importance of letting them process their feelings at their own pace. The doorbell rang, Sandy Roberson arriving for their monthly foundation meeting. She joined the board of directors, using her investigative skills to track potential violations of medical ethics. "Got something interesting," she said, setting up her laptop at the kitchen table. "Pattern of unusual genetic testing at 3 clinics in the Midwest. Similar to Genesis's early protocols." Frank studied the data she'd gathered. After Genesis Future's collapse, several former employees had tried starting similar programs. The foundation had exposed each attempt, ensuring the legal consequences were severe enough to discourage others. "Send everything to Tanner," he decided. "Let the FBI investigate quietly before we go public. Last thing we need is these people destroying evidence." Agent Tanner had become a close ally, recognizing that the Foundation's resources and expertise complemented the FBI's authority. Together, they prevented several attempts to resurrect McElroy's work. Later that evening, Frank sat in his study, reviewing applications for the Foundation's victim support program. They'd expanded beyond genetic testing cases, helping families affected by various forms of medical fraud. Each case reminded him why they'd created the Foundation, to ensure no other family endured what they had. A knock at his door revealed both twins. "Busy?" Amy asked. "Never too busy for you two." They settled into their usual spots, Amy on the small sofa, Anna in the oversized chair. These evening talks had become their ritual, a time for questions, concerns, or just sharing thoughts. "We've been thinking," Anna began, "about the Foundation's youth program. We want to help." Frank raised an eyebrow. They'd never shown interest in the Foundation's work before, preferring to maintain their privacy. "There are other kids like us," Amy explained, "who found out their families aren't what they thought. Maybe we could help them? Show them it gets better?" Pride and love squeezed Frank's heart. His daughters, turning their pain into purpose, choosing to help others heal. They'd inherited none of McElroy's DNA that mattered. Their compassion, their strength, their resilience came from choices and experiences, not genetics. "If you're sure," he said, "we'll set something up. But only when you're ready, and only on your terms." They discussed possibilities, support groups, mentoring programs, ways to help other children understand that family transcended biology. The twins' enthusiasm reminded Frank of a truth he'd learned through their ordeal. Sometimes the strongest families were forged in adversity. Looking at his daughters, confident, compassionate, and wise beyond their years, Frank knew every sacrifice had been worth it. Victoria and McElroy had tried to create a genetic dynasty, but they'd failed to understand what really shaped human development. It wasn't DNA or psychological conditioning that determined character. It was love, courage, and the choices people made when facing their darkest moments. The price of secrets had been high, but it had bought something priceless. The truth that family wasn't about genetics or experiments or calculated manipulation. It was about love, protection, and the willingness to fight for those who trusted you with their hearts. Frank had paid that price willingly, and the reward was sitting right in front of him. 2 remarkable young women who proved every day that true parenthood had nothing to do with DNA and everything to do with love. Epilogue. 10 years later. The Massachusetts Correctional Institution for Women maintained strict visiting hours. Victoria Pitts, now 15 years into her 20-year sentence, sat in the sterile visitation room, her once immaculate appearance dulled by prison life. Her hands, once adorned with expensive rings, now bore the calluses of mandatory labor programs. Your appeal was denied again, her court-appointed lawyer informed her, shuffling through papers. The board found no compelling reason to reduce your sentence. Victoria's professional mask, worn thin by years of incarceration, cracked slightly. And the letters? Still returned unopened. Your daughters maintain their no-contact request. Across the state, in a maximum security federal prison, Warren McElroy's empire had been reduced to a 6x8 cell. The biotechnology mogul who once commanded a genetic dynasty now spent his days in solitary confinement, his multiple life sentences stretching before him like an endless void. His latest psychiatric evaluation noted increasing paranoia and obsession with his legacy. The guards had confiscated numerous journals filled with his ravings about genetic superiority and evolutionary destiny. His considerable fortune, seized by federal authorities, had been distributed among his victims through the Medical Ethics Oversight Foundation. Meanwhile, the foundation's headquarters in downtown Boston buzzed with activity. Frank Draper, now in his mid-50s, studied the latest reports from their global monitoring network. The organization he'd built from the ashes of Genesis Futures had become the world's leading watchdog for medical ethics violations. The Singapore case is solid, Sandy Roberson said, dropping a thick file on his desk. Now the Foundation's director of investigations, she built a global network of informants tracking potential genetic research violations. Another attempt to replicate McElroy's work, but we caught it early. Forward everything to Tanner's team, Frank replied. Agent Tanner, now deputy director of the FBI's Medical Crimes Division, had maintained their partnership over the years. Together, they prevented dozens of attempts to resurrect McElroy's methods. Dr. Juana Butler entered, her earlier paranoia replaced by purposeful confidence. As the Foundation's chief scientific officer, she'd helped develop sophisticated detection methods for illegal genetic experimentation. The new screening protocols are working, she reported. 3 major fertility clinics flagged suspicious requests last month, all traced back to former Genesis employees. The door opened again, admitting Amy and Anna Draper, now 22 and freshly graduated from college. Amy's psychology degree and Anna's bioethics major reflected their commitment to preventing others from suffering their mother's betrayal. The youth program's expanding, Amy announced. She transformed the Foundation's support services, creating specialized programs for children affected by medical fraud. 3 new chapters opening next month, and the legal team approved our new advocacy initiative, Anna added. She'd inherited Frank's strategic mind, applying it to strengthening medical ethics legislation. We're pushing for stricter penalties for unauthorized genetic experimentation. Frank studied his daughters with pride. They transformed their trauma into purpose, using their unique perspective to help others. The twins had rejected any connection to their biological father, legally changing their last name to Draper on their 18th birthday. How's James Henderson's group doing? Frank asked, referring to their original support network. Growing stronger, Amy replied. The monthly meetings now include families from 6 states. His daughter Lisa's starting med school next fall. Says she wants to show how genetic research should be conducted ethically. The support network had evolved into a nationwide community. The families bound by McElroy's betrayal had forged genuine connections, proving that shared experience and mutual support could heal even the deepest wounds. A notification popped up on Frank's computer, the latest report from their prison monitoring system. Victoria had attempted to publish another academic paper, analyzing the psychological impact of non-traditional family structures. The Prison Review Board had rejected it, noting her continuing failure to acknowledge the harm she'd caused. Still no remorse, Anna observed, reading over his shoulder. Did you hear she tried contacting Mom's old colleagues? Wanted to collaborate on a research paper about attachment disruption in engineered family units. Frank's expression hardened. A decade later, his ruthlessness toward those who'd betrayed his family remained unchanged. He'd ensured Victoria's professional reputation was thoroughly destroyed, her academic credentials revoked, her research permanently discredited. Your mother made her choice, he said quietly. She chose her ambitions over her humanity. The Foundation's alert system chimed. Another potential Genesis-style operation detected, this time in Eastern Europe. Frank's team moved with practiced efficiency, their response honed by years of experience. Sandy, coordinate with our Kiev office. Butler, analyze their research protocols. Girls, see if any of their staff connects to Genesis's old network. As his daughters left to begin their tasks, Frank reflected on the decades since the trials. Victoria and McElroy had sought to create a superior human lineage through genetic manipulation and psychological conditioning. Instead, they'd sparked a movement dedicated to protecting families from scientific overreach. The Price of Secrets Foundation, as it was unofficially known, had grown beyond its origins. They now operated in 32 countries, their work encompassing everything from investigating illegal experiments to supporting victims of medical fraud. Their legal advocacy had helped pass stringent regulations governing genetic research and human experimentation. Later that evening, Frank hosted their monthly family dinner. The gathering included James Henderson and his daughter Lisa, Dr. Butler and her research team, Sandy Roberson, and several other families from their support network. These dinners had become a tradition, a reminder of the genuine bonds that had emerged from artificial beginnings. "Did you see the latest letter?" Henderson asked quietly as they prepared coffee. Another former Genesis employee had attempted to contact McElroy, seeking guidance for a new genetic engineering project. "They never learn." "They learn," Frank corrected. "When we teach them the consequences." His phone buzzed, a message from Tanner about Victoria's latest psychiatric evaluation. She remained convinced of her research's validity, viewing her imprisonment as temporary setback rather than punishment. McElroy's influence, it seemed, had permanently warped her understanding of ethics and human dignity. In the living room, Amy and Anna chatted with Lisa Henderson about their latest foundation projects. The second generation of families affected by Genesis had chosen different paths to address their legacy. Some, like Frank's daughters, worked directly to prevent similar abuses. Others, like Lisa, sought to reform genetic research from within. Frank watched them with satisfaction. Victoria and McElroy had tried to engineer the perfect human specimens through genetics and manipulation. Instead, they'd created something they never intended, a community of individuals dedicated to protecting others from scientific exploitation. The Foundation's latest initiative sat on his desk, a comprehensive global monitoring system for genetic research facilities. The project would link medical ethics boards worldwide, making it nearly impossible to conduct unauthorized experiments without detection. "Dad," Amy called from the living room, "tell everyone about the Singapore case." As Frank joined the group, he noted how far they'd all come. Victoria remained imprisoned, her academic ambitions reduced to rejected papers and denied appeals. McElroy's grand vision of a genetic dynasty had produced instead a powerful force opposing everything he'd tried to achieve. The price of their secrets had been high, but it had purchased something invaluable, a legacy of protection, advocacy, and genuine human connection. Frank's revenge hadn't just been about punishment. It had created a lasting mechanism to prevent others from suffering similar betrayals. "You know," Anna said later, as the guests were leaving, "Mom's eligible for parole review next year." Frank's expression remained impassive. "The Foundation will submit a detailed impact statement to the parole board. They should understand the full scope of her crimes." The twins nodded, sharing their father's unforgiving stance. Victoria had sacrificed her family for academic ambition, choosing research over human dignity. Her punishment wasn't just the prison sentence. It was knowing her own daughters had rejected everything she believed in. That night, Frank added the Singapore case files to their database of prevented experiments. The system had grown to include thousands of cases, each representing families protected from experiencing what they had endured. Victoria and McElroy had sought to advance human evolution through manipulation and control. Instead, they'd triggered an evolution in how society protected itself from scientific overreach. Their secrets, exposed and documented, had become cautionary tales in medical ethics courses worldwide. The price of secrets, Frank reflected, wasn't just paid by those who kept them. Sometimes, the higher price was paid by those who exposed them, in vigilance, in responsibility, in the endless work of preventing history from repeating. But as he looked at the family photos on his desk, genuine moments of joy and connection that no genetic engineering could create, He knew every price had been worth paying. Victoria and McElroy had tried to engineer the perfect family. Instead, they taught the world what real family meant: love, loyalty, and the courage to fight for what mattered most. The Foundation's motto, displayed prominently in their lobby, said it all: truth protects. The price of secrets had purchased something priceless: the power to ensure other families would never pay that price again. This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comments section. Thanks for your time. If you enjoy this story, please subscribe to this channel. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.